And the tribunal said that wasn't the reason that they'd sacked me. The real reason they'd sacked me was because I had anti-Zionist views. But now, so what we now find is that the British courts in this particular decision are actually to the left of the revolutionary left, or most of the revolutionary left in this country, which is a pretty extraordinary finding. It's quite clear that it's legal and permissible to say that Zionism is a racist endeavor, that Israel itself is a racist endeavor. Actually, he's a liberal Zionist, and just the same is the case with Abdul Rahman al-Said and with Zoran Mamdani. So I don't just mean dismantling the Zionist movement, the Zionist colony in the Levant, in its occupation of Syria and Lebanon and, of course, all of Palestine. I mean, dismantling Zionist movement all over the world.
So, David, first of all, thanks for joining us on Vocal Politics. First and foremost, huge congratulations on your legal victory last week, where you've secured anti-Zionism as a protected belief under the Equality Act. For people that are less familiar with the backstory of this since 2021, could you give a bit of a backstory of what happened?
Yeah, so I was sacked on the 1st of October 2021 by the University of Bristol, who had investigated me 3 times, and on each occasion had found me not guilty of any anti-Semitism at all. But they nevertheless decided that on the 3rd occasion that they would sack me because I wasn't professional in the sense that I had said that I was attacked and complained about by Zionist student groups. So they sacked me. I took them to a tribunal, an employment tribunal, and the tribunal said that wasn't the reason that they'd sacked me. The real reason they'd sacked me was because I had anti-Zionist views and I had expressed them. And that was the real reason. And also they said that anti-Zionist views were worthy of respect in a democratic society, and that thus should be protected as philosophical belief under the Equality Act of 2010. So then what happened was the university appealed, and we had a hearing in November 2025. And the tribunal reported 9 months later, quite a long time after they would normally have reported, and they have rejected every single one of Bristol University's attempts to overturn the judgment. So it's now a legal precedent, and it's now against the law to sack people for being anti-Zionists and expressing their anti-Zionist views.
So what does this legal victory mean for you personally? Will you be going back to teaching as a professor? Will you go back to Bristol University? And what does it mean for workers in your profession that hold anti-Zionist views moving forward?
Well, I hope to go back to my job as Professor of Political Sociology at the University of Bristol and to take up my job again. And the reason that I want to do that is not just because I need a job, but because when they sacked me, that was in effect a career-ending sacking, because of the controversy around it, no other university in this country will employ me. So there's no way I can get a job as an academic again unless Bristol faces up to the fact that they've done wrong and reappoints me to my post. So that's the key reason that I want to go back. But we don't know if that's going to happen or not. The court has to determine what the penalties will be for Bristol, what compensation I will get, and whether they will have to reinstate me. And we'll see what happens with that when the hearing comes up in a few months, I would imagine. On the profession in general, well, this is not just a question of academics being able to say that Zionism is racism, that Zionism is colonialist, that Zionism is imperialist. It's about anyone in any employment or similar relationship. It doesn't just affect academics, it affects everybody who has an employment contract. So therefore, in future, if anyone is sacked or disciplined or suspended for having anti-Zionist views and they go to a tribunal, the tribunal will have to conclude that they were wrongfully sacked, unless there are other issues which are specific to their particular case. But on the specific question of anti-Zionist views, they are protected under UK law, and that, of course, it takes a sort of a knife to the key strategy used by the Zionists, which is to pretend that anti-Zionism is somehow anti-Semitic or Judeophobic. So that it's a massive step forward for the movement, the anti-Zionist movement, and for people to be able to be confident and able to stand up and condemn what's happening in the Levant, to condemn the activities of the Zionist movement without having to try and confine that to mild words about Netanyahu's policies. No, the problem with the Zionists is the whole Zionist colony. The whole thing has to be dismantled. and removed from the Levant. It's not just a question of having slightly better policies by some other genocidal leader of the Zionist entity.
So I just wanted to ask you, with this new legal precedent and the government's adoption of the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, which includes criticism of Zionism as a racist endeavor being synonymous with anti-Semitism, is there now like a contradiction between this new legal precedent and the government's own adoption of what anti-Semitism is? And how should people navigate that moving forward?
Well, there's a clear contradiction, yes. Now, of course, what they will say is that the IHRA is not legally binding. It's only advisory, and that's what has been said by its originators. But there is still a clear contradiction. This will help the process of driving the IHRA definition out of public institutions in the UK and more widely. For example, recently the British Medical Association, the effective trade union of doctors in the country, have voted against the IHRA and not to adopt it, and to in fact remove it from their operating procedures, and that will have to happen throughout government. Every single government department, every police office in the country, every police station in the country is bound, has adopted the IHRA, and of course that's now going to have to be revised. And I'm very pleased that my victory will mean that those kinds of institutional changes will have to take place at some point. And of course there'll be a struggle over that, and the Zionists will defend that to the last. But in the end, it's quite clear that it's legal and permissible to say that Zionism is a racist endeavor, that Israel itself is a racist endeavor. That was always my position, and obviously it's also a matter of fact.
So since 2021 and before then, anti-Semitism in UK politics particularly has been weaponized to try to discredit people and remove people from certain positions. I know a friend of yours, Chris Williamson, has also faced a similar challenge. A lot of people on the mainstream British left seem to distance themselves from people that get these false accusations. I'm sure you've felt this yourself. What does this say about the British left in their ability to confront collectively false accusations of anti-Semitism? Because we've seen this really since 2016 to 2026. There seems to be no solidarity amongst the mainstream left. What's your view on this?
Well, I think the problem is that the criticism of Zionism on the mainstream left, and even including sections of the so-called revolutionary left, is very weak. It didn't used to be so weak. One of the key founders of the Socialist Workers' Party, for example, Tony Cliff, was a former Zionist who became an anti-Zionist after his experience with left-wing and socialist Zionists in occupied Palestine. But now the parties like the SWP and other Trotskyist parties, supposedly revolutionary parties, they're very scared of using the Z word. They're very scared of saying Zionist, and they're very scared of even formulating the idea that there is such a thing as a Zionist movement in addition to, or rather larger than, the Israel lobby. And part of the reason for that, I think, is the penetration and infiltration of the Zionists into left spaces over the last half century or so. And that started, of course, mostly with the anti-racist movement, where left Zionists would be part of the Rock Against Racism in the 70s, for example, or Unite Against Fascism in the 90s. And the price of that involvement was that racism could be opposed, but there was one form of racism which couldn't be full-frontedly opposed, and that was Zionism. And that's the difficulty, is that some parts of the left have effectively been infiltrated, and as a result, they decide that if you are too critical of Zionism, that you have to be cut off from the movement and you have to be described as anti-Semitic. So what we now find is that the British courts in this particular decision are actually to the left of the revolutionary left, or most of the revolutionary left in this country, which is a pretty extraordinary finding. And I see that since the judgment has come out, since the appeal judgment has come out, there have been some on the left who were previously critical of me who have become a little less critical of me. But there's a long way to go for them to catch up with where we are in the debate on this, because of course the whole question of what Zionism is and how it relates to Jewish supremacy is something, as a debate, which has come on leaps and bounds as a result of the genocide. And there are many on the left who are still quite a long way behind that debate.
Just on British electoral politics, when it comes to all anti-imperialist movements at the moment that are fighting against Zionism and imperialism, particularly in West Asia, All of them are prescribed as terrorist organizations in the UK. So that's Hezbollah's military and political wing, it's Hamas. Now the IRGC and the new National Security Act and Palestine Action. We know a lot of this comes from lobbying groups and security service pressure. So my question really is, do you think you can be the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom if you're in opposition to these prescriptions, or if you're not willing to fall in line on these issues? Is it possible to be the Prime Minister of England and take a different stance?
Well, at present, no. I mean, we saw what happened to Jeremy Corbyn as the leader of the Labour Party. He wasn't even, and still isn't even, an anti-Zionist, but nevertheless, he was so critical by their comparisons, by their standards of the Zionist enterprise, that they hounded him out of office. And it was the Zionists which led that campaign. That's perfectly clear. But the idea of having a Prime Minister who's anti-Zionist is so far away. We haven't even got the possibility we haven't even got one mainstream political party which has a leader who's an anti-Zionist. We don't have any political parties which have declared themselves as being anti-Zionist who are in the mainstream. The only exceptions really are the Workers' Party and maybe some of the smaller communist parties. But we're really quite far away from that kind of clarity. Every single party, the mainstream party, has a Friends of Israel group, with the exception of the Greens, which is an internal group called the Jewish Greens, which is dedicated to making sure that they can never be an anti-Zionist party. So it's the politics of this country is fairly well stitched up, as is the case in most other European nations, and of course in the US.
So we're seeing in the UK electorate and the US electorate an increase amongst the people that are in opposition to the genocide in Gaza, for example, the war in Iran. And then we're seeing pop up these figures like Mamdani or Abdullah Sayed in the United States. And now we have Andy Burnham as the Prime Minister in the UK, who, when he became Prime Minister, was trying to give a slightly more left narrative, and then immediately capitulated to Trump, let him use the military bases to bomb Iran, and he's not going to make any difference on policy when it comes to Palestine. Do you think people are using the shift in the electorate just to gain a seat in office, but have no real intention to change anything? And this applies to the UK and the United States.
Yeah, but I think it's worse than that. It's not just that these particular candidates are having an eye to the main chance that they can get elected. Mamdani as the mayor, Abdul Rahman El Said as well in his recent victory. It's also that they are being used by the Democratic Party to corral opposition to the genocide, such that in the future there'll be this kind of voice on the left, like we saw with the Squad previously, with AOC, etc. This voice on the left, who in the end will come in and support Democrats to pursue the same policies as they always have. I mean, Bernie Sanders was the key indication of that, wasn't he? Where it looked like he was very critical of Israel, and then people realized actually he's a liberal Zionist, and just the same is the case with Abdul Rahman El Said and with Zoran Mamdani. They're liberal Zionists, and they won't rock the boat. And they're there to make sure they let off some of the pressure, which popular opinion is bubbling up from below, but they will not be helping to move seriously in any half decent direction in terms of arms embargoes, in terms of arresting Netanyahu, in terms of BDS, or in terms of any of the other demands which the movement has. And these are the moderate demands. They're not even going towards the moderate demands.
So last question, David. As we've discussed, in British electoral politics, there's really no one, if you are an anti-Zionist or you are an anti-imperialist, there's no mainstream political party to align yourself with. So I guess my last question is, if you are in that category, where do we collectively put our energy? Because we can't put it behind, obviously, the Labour Party, the Green Party, the Conservative Party. Where is the outlet for people to put their energy? Like, in your opinion, what would you suggest?
Well, look, I mean, I think the key thing is about dismantling the Zionist movement. So I don't just mean dismantling the Zionist movement, the Zionist colony in the Levant, and its occupation of Syria and Lebanon and, of course, all of Palestine. I mean, dismantling the Zionist movement all over the world. The Zionist movement is powerful in this country, in politics, yes, in public life. There are perhaps more than 3,000 Zionist organizations in the UK, charities and companies, which on a daily basis are helping to support the occupation forces, the illegal settlements, and indeed other aspects of the Zionist entity itself. All of these organizations can be targeted, can be campaigned against, can be shut down. And of course, they are damaging to British domestic politics as well, pushing Islamophobia, pushing Jewish supremacy in their activities in the UK. So all of these organizations are a key target, it seems to me, for a renewed anti-Zionist movement. And that, I think, is where the energy has to go. If the Green Party was to pass an anti-Zionist motion, then there would be an argument for going into the Green Party. If your party, the new Corbyn and Sultana venture, has any sign of moving towards being an anti-Zionist party, then that would be the case too. But so far, I don't see much in the way of evidence for that, apart from Sultana's various statements that she is herself an anti-Zionist. So there's lots of things that people can do all over the country. Wherever you are, there are Zionists within easy reach who can be researched about and who can be campaigned against, so that their charities and their companies which are engaged in supporting genocide can be shut down.